welcome to Series 2 of my podcast, Innervation, where we get to hear the wisdom and experiences of incredible women in science and technology. My aim with the conversations that you'll hear on this show is to bring out the humanness of STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. I myself grew up in a very STEMmy household where we were always encouraged to be curious and ask loads of questions about the world around us. As a result, I ended up studying mechanical engineering, a great subject for understanding how the world works. But at the end of my studies, I was able to mathematically model chaotic behaviours, which was great. But life itself was actually the thing that taught me that not everything can be explained with a neat mathematical equation. Life doesn't always unfold in a straight line, and there are lots of twists and turns along the way. So here on Innervation, I want to hear how other women deal with this. This week, I talked to Jacquelin Chu, a physician.
My name's Jacqueline Chu. I'm a physician. I'm a gastroenterologist. I just finished my fellowship at Mass General in Boston, and I'll be starting at a private practice next week.
Can you explain in basic terms what it is that you're involved in with your work?
The most of what I do as a physician and a gastroenterologist is seeing patients in the clinic who have gastrointestinal issues. So things stemming from, the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines, the colon. And we do things like treating diseases such as inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel, which is really common, and doing things like colon cancer screening. That's the majority of what I do, but I also, like many physicians, participate in research as well. So many physicians, besides seeing patients, also like to do research to try to help build our fundamental base of knowledge about medicine and also discover new therapies and also create new devices to help with patient care. So during my fellowship, which has been the last 3 years, I've been working with Dr. Gio Traverso at MIT, basically developing new devices to help with patient care, particularly using the unique properties of the gastrointestinal tract.
And what inspired you to get into something like this?
So in terms of patient care, I just think that, it's one of the most fulfilling things that you can do with your career is really dedicate your life to helping people get better, making people feel better symptomatically, checking for cancer, treating cancer. I think all those things are incredibly important to everyone. And so that's really what drew me to medicine, the opportunity to make, as part of my life's work, taking care of people. In addition to that, I think the exciting part about being involved with research, which I've been doing over the last several years, is really the opportunity to make new discoveries and to contribute to making patient care even better than what we currently have.
Was there something in your childhood that made you think, I need to go into this?
I think like many kids, I love to play doctor. You get those plastic doctor sets, and my sister was my first patient. But besides that, I think, at the time that I was growing up, there was a lot of science fiction that I used to read. I don't know if you remember this book, The Andromeda Strain, but it was about these researchers who discover this new virus. It's all sounding very relevant nowadays with COVID. But so I was really interested in thinking about, making new discoveries and all sort of related to human health, though, I think was the main thing for me, that across the spectrum, whether it's taking care of patients directly or doing research, that it's all really tied to the goal of helping people get better. So that's really been with me through childhood, and then furthermore supported by the experiences I had in college, volunteering at clinics, also doing research in a lab in college, and then furthermore in medical school.
And were you one of these kids that were just naturally talented at STEM, and so it was obvious that you would go in this direction?
Yeah, I think that I had a lot of interest as a kid. I did like science. My favorite show was The Magic School Bus. I don't know if you have that in the UK, but it was really popular here. But I also loved, reading. I loved literature. I think it's really important for kids to sort of be able to explore many different fields. And then, there's plenty of time later in life to sort of specialize. I think, it is interesting being a woman in STEM. I think as a kid, I was often told, looking back on it now, at the time I didn't really realize, but looking back, I think there's a lot of like, oh, you're really good at math or you're really good at science. It's like slightly surprising because you're a girl. I did sort of get that impression. Now thinking back, I'm like, wow, that was I can see how that would be discouraging. But I think that the standards did seem different for girls and boys growing up. From what I remember. But I think I did overall, for my family, feel very supported to go into a STEM field. I think that helped a lot.
There's a huge amount of pressure and it can be really intimidating going into the science subjects. Like, what kind of experience did you have with that?
Yeah. So my parents, I think it's like it was their dream to have one of their kids be a doctor. So I did feel I felt a lot of encouragement, I would say, from them, even as a child. I think my initial reaction was actually to sort of push back against that and say, I don't want to be a doctor because my parents want me to do that. But I did still feel personally drawn to other related fields, like doing basic science research. I do think that there is some pressure, like if you're a woman as a girl, as a child. I did feel like people made a big deal out of me being good at STEM subjects, and then I felt the pressure to perform. I think growing up, much less so than now, I felt a bit hesitant about asking questions and things because I didn't want to sort of reveal that I didn't know something, because I felt like I was sort of leading the way or setting the example as a successful girl in science and math. But now I think my advice to others growing up sort of in this environment is to have sort of the confidence that you're going to be really good at whatever you love. If you put, time and dedication into it, I think that having a growth mindset is really important, and thinking that, don't be afraid to sort of try and fail. That's the best way to learn. And so I think if I had to give myself advice looking back when I was younger, is that, if you're interested in something like science, math, or those STEM fields, even if you feel like you don't know everything about it, or if you're unsure about things or don't feel completely confident, that's totally fine. And part of the growth mindset is to accept that you will learn and you will get better, but you have to sort of, be willing to take risks and be willing to fail.
Yeah. I mean, you've talked about what it's like being a woman in STEM. I think medical fields do tend to have a more healthy ratio in terms of gender balance, but have you ever felt like out of place?
So I think it's great that there is more representation of women in medicine now. So I think, most recently, medical students entering the medical field, it's about 50-50 or even slightly leaning more women now. But as you follow the pipeline, that actually drops off. And so, for example, in gastroenterology, which is a subspecialty that I'm in, it's only about 15 to 18% women. And then if you look at the top, like people who lead medical schools, lead hospitals, there's very, very few women represented. So it's certainly a pipeline problem. And I think that's changing, but it is still part of the culture of medicine that it's very male dominated. And a lot of the decisions made at the top that influence the downstream culture is very much, still dictated by men. I'm excited to see that that's changing and be part of the change. But I think a lot of things we deal with, like unconscious bias and all that, that's still very much present.
What do you think is making women drop out?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of factors. I think one is lack of role models or lack of understanding about issues related to gender bias, that women do face some discrimination as they go along. Part of it is also related to family. For example, in the US, we have very poor maternal support in terms of family leave. And in medical training, I think that's even less so. You're really expected, it's changing a lot now at many places, but as it is, there's a lot of onus on either the mother or the father, whoever is taking care of the baby, to sort of take it out of their own schedule to if you want to take parental leave and then have to make that up later. And so that's very difficult to do in a rigorous medical training situation, especially if it's prolonged. So I think that's definitely a part of it too, is if you see where women tend to drop out of the pipeline, a lot of it happens around residency and then their first job. So I think that there's a lot of issues related to parental support there as well.
Do you have a family? Do you want to have a family? If so, I mean, depending on your answer, like, how do you fit that in?
Yeah, so my husband and I do eventually want to have a family. I think, what I've heard from many people over the years is there's no perfect time. And so there's always going to be some challenges involved, whether it's if you're having kids early in your training, trying to balance that with, a crazy residency schedule where you could be working 80 hours a week. If you're having kids later in life, from the biological side, there could be challenges there as well. So it's really more, I think, about what works for you as parents and what feels right for you guys. For us, things that we're considering are sort of financial, for medical training, there's a lot of debt that you incur that you don't pay off until later in life. So I think that's part of it. But then also, where we are in our careers, what we want to be doing right now. I'm starting a new job, as I mentioned, and my husband is very involved in research. And so for us right now, we sort of want to focus on those things, but to eventually have kids. But, I know plenty of people who've had kids in residency or even in medical school. And they always say, I did it in sort of an atypical fashion, but it totally worked out for us.
Yeah, I find that sort of trying to be everything as a woman, a mother, have a career, juggle a relationship, all those things require decisions, and those decisions are so individual. Mm-hmm. There's no right way. And I just think it's so difficult for any woman going into STEM or maybe other professions, I don't know, but it always seems really tricky to know what's right for you as an individual in terms of all of those aspects. Yes. Have you found like your own path with that, or are you still trying to figure it out as you go along?
Yeah, I think I'm still also trying to figure it out as I go along too. I think one of the things that really stood out to me is when I read Lean In, by Sheryl Sandberg. And I think one part she said is that she, in her role as sort of like a mentor to many young women, that she's found that many women are sort of already worrying years ahead of actually before they plan to start a family, about sort of navigating their careers and making career decisions to sort of allow for them to have a family when the time is right, and actually holding themselves back in that regard. And so I think, as I said, because I think, for many people, the decision to start a family, when the right time that is so different from person to person, and can change a lot year to year, just depending on what's happening in your life, that I really resonated to me that it makes sense not to hold yourself back in anticipation of something that might happen, you don't know when. I think for us, my husband and I, it's been sort of taking every day, every year by year, seeing what's right for us at that time. And then, when the time comes when it feels right for us to start a family, I think doing it in the moment rather than trying to make so many life changes, to try to plan for it many years ahead.
Everyone's got a very individual story to tell about this. And I don't think there's a one solution fits all. But I do think that, when you go into something like STEM, it requires so much studying. And after all of that studying, you don't want to throw it all away to start a family. And so it's just really difficult. I think we're living in a society where I don't think the system is really on our side. Mm-hmm. And so, part of having these conversations is to try and piece together what the right way is to navigate through a system that doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. But I think it will continue to be a tricky one for women.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the key parts about that is sort of what we talked about, having more women in leadership, because, unless the problem is identified and people know it's something that needs to change, it's not going to be addressed, and it's going to be left up to individuals to figure it out for themselves. So for example, I think one really positive thing is that there are a lot more women taking on the role of a program director. That's the person who organizes and directs the training programs for people going through medical training. And because there's more women in those roles, there's a lot more emphasis being placed on how can we make parental leave or family leave better, and other issues that I think women have been dealing with for many years that have maybe sort of gone unnoticed until there's been a woman who's been through it herself that knows that these things need to be addressed.
Absolutely. In terms of advice from either friends, family, professional colleagues, what's been the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, I think that is such a good question. I think the best piece of advice I've gotten that I've only really embraced in later years is trying to do what is just ignoring what everyone else would think. Just imagine if you were in like a black box, or if you moved suddenly to a place where absolutely no one knew you, what would you really want to do just for yourself? Trying to remove all those external pressures and think, what would make me happy, not what would make my family or, my mentor or other colleagues, what would they consider the best, but rather what's best for me. And so when I was trying to decide what I want to do for, my first real job out of training, that was a very difficult decision to remove all the things about, training really teaches you to try to go for what's the most prestigious or, what is considered the best by some external force. And really thinking about for you personally, if no one knew what you were going to decide and no one was going to have anything to say about it, and it was just for yourself, like what would you really want to do with your life?
That's such amazing advice, but also so tricky, because sometimes what we consider to be best for us is often tied to how best we fit into society. Mm-hmm. Like they can be so deeply entangled. So
yeah, but I think, then if for yourself that what would make you most happy is to have, X role in society or be in a position where, let's say for me, if I lived in a black box and I knew that for me, what would be most important is to know that I am working at like the top center in the country. And that's for me, what is most validating, then I think that is the right decision. That would make you the most happy. But I think the key part is what would make you most happy, not what would make someone else. I think the other thing too is that, we as women are really encouraged throughout our lives to be sort of more like supporting others or have this sort of this drive to please other people. And I think one of the challenges as we're navigating our careers is to try to sort of remove ourselves from that impetus and think more about, not in a selfish way, but really for ourselves, what do we actually want, not just all these external pressures that are placed on us.
That makes me think of that saying, put your own oxygen mask on before helping others.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm.
How do you keep yourself kind of balanced, because you're juggling so much and you must be so busy? How do you get centered again?
Yeah, I think for everyone it's different, but for me personally, I always need to have a little bit of time just to myself. So it could be like, binging TV or listening to an audiobook or something, but just a piece of the day, every day, where I can spend a little bit of time just doing nothing. And I think the other thing too that one of my other mentors told me that I really value is you can't finish everything in a day. Whatever doesn't get done at the end of the day, wasn't the most important. So it's just the fact that we're all super busy and we can never complete everything on our task list that we want every day, but sort of forgiving ourselves at the end of the day and just acknowledging that, we did our best. I think I try to do that a lot, and every day is a new day, and don't carry over sort of regrets from things you should have finished or things you should have done the day before.
Oh, that's so tough, because
I know, easier said than done.
For women in STEM, we're such perfectionists, Right. So, but great if you can achieve it. What has been the most humbling experience you've ever had in life?
I think, so what part of medical training is that we do many rotations we're like constantly changing where we are in the hospital. Like I'll say like every 2 to 4 weeks, you're in a new position. That means like in a new department, a new team, new patients. And it's very humbling to sort of have to restart every couple of weeks. Like just as soon as you feel like you've gotten the hang of like some particular patients, you finally understand everything that's going on about them, you know the nurses, you know sort of your team, you've reached a good workflow, all of a sudden you're switched to a different place. And so it's the constant feel of like, I'm new and I don't know exactly, I don't even know where the bathroom is in this new department. Constantly feeling like you're the newcomer can be really jarring and really humbling, I think. But I think it's also a great experience because it's really taught me to be much more comfortable with uncertainty, like to go into a new area, a new place, a new job, and just be like, well, I'm just going to pick it up. I'm going to learn it and it's going to be fine. And everyone knows the first few days, you sort of are new. I think that's a very difficult skill to learn. And so even though it was, at times very stressful during medical training, I think that's been one of the best learning experiences that I've had.
Well, the definition of humility is to remain teachable. And
Right.
You're literally in a situation where you have to be teachable.
Exactly. Yeah.
What do you reckon is your most significant superpower?
I would say my best superpower, I think, is that I can be very laser focused and efficient. And I think that's really important to your earlier question about how to ensure, that I'm able to have some time for myself or, some time to decompress every day, is that sort of I try to do everything as efficiently as possible so that, I guess for me, it's not about the total number of hours worked that shows like how hard you're working. It's the amount of how productive you are. And so for me, like I always try, instead of, having an 8-hour work day, I might try to compress everything into like a 5-hour work day so that I can have those 3 hours off. So I'm really focused for those 5 hours and then I just take the rest of the time off. And for me personally, that's been really, really useful.
I must say you do come across as being a woman that really knows exactly what she wants and kind of like, you just go for it, like nothing gets in your way. Like, where did that come from?
Yep. So I think a lot from my family, leading by example. Part of it also is, I did feel as a kid, being a woman interested, or a girl interested in STEM, I did always sort of feel, I think, this extra drive to really prove myself. And I think, there's a lot of stuff that's been published about sort of like imposter syndrome and always feeling like you need to, be ahead of everything or be prepared for people to challenge you. And so I think I did grow up with some of that as well. Like I always wanted to be extra prepared. So, I could really prove myself as being, just as good as, one of the boys or something. So I think having that mentality helped me be very prepared and learn to be very efficient. Because as you also said, I think having so many different things to balance on our plates, I think not just for women in STEM, but I think for all trainees in medical training, you always have so many different things pulling you in multiple directions. Learning how to be efficient and sort of learning to prioritize, I think, is the other thing, because you can't get everything done in a day. Learning what's really important to you to get done, and then learning how to be the most efficient in getting those tasks completed.
Do you think the way you have evolved has anything to do with maybe your cultural or, your ethnicity?
Sure. So I think, my parents are Vietnamese immigrants from, just before the war. And I think, I think all immigrant children, this is just my observation, but I think many immigrant children would say this is true, that we do recognize the sacrifices that our parents have made in order to give us this better life, and all the hardships that they went through. Our lives, are so easy in comparison that I think I've always felt a drive to really make it worth it for them, and for them to be proud of me, I think, is a big part of what drives me. And so I do think I've always part of the drive to succeed has been just myself, just, wanting to do the best at everything I try, but also for my parents, wanting to have them be proud of me and for them to see, like, they immigrated here and now their children can be so successful and have such a big role in the community. I think that has been really rewarding for them, I hope. And so that has been a big part of how I try to approach things.
ED&I, equality, diversity, and inclusion, is an ever-growing subject within STEM. Why do you think, or maybe you don't, what are your perspectives on the importance of ED&I?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important. I think especially thinking about STEM and technology and how that's going to shape our world going forward, I think what things are made, addressing what problems, that really requires a diverse community to be, in the driver's seat, deciding what problems need to be solved, what solutions need to be made. Because, for example, I think like a few years ago, or several years ago now, when there's the second tech boom, a lot of the products being made were driven by, there's anything wrong with it, but like 30-year-old white men, like just out of college, thinking like, okay, what do I want? So like making all these apps about like laundry services and apps about, like Uber, like how do I get around the city? And I think those things are great, but they're solving problems of a very niche population. And I think the more diverse viewpoints we can bring in, the more we can realize what are all the different needs of many different communities that need to be solved. And I think, technology is going to become an even bigger and bigger part of our lives and taking over many more jobs, I think, going forward. And so thinking very carefully about, how technology impacts our daily lives, which jobs it's taking over, what new jobs they can create. I think we really need a diverse community to help drive those conversations.
Definitely. How do you think, given your background and experiences, how do you think we can improve the statistics in ED&I? Are there some obvious solutions here?
Oh, unfortunately, I don't think there's any obvious solutions. Otherwise, hopefully we would have already done them. I think part of it is like, the sad truth is that I think a lot of companies and corporations, which make up a lot of tech now, for example, are really driven by money. And so I think, there needs to be more financial incentives or penalties to really drive those companies to value diversity more than just for them to say like, oh, we believe in diversity and be able to create like a poster about it for PR. I think there needs to be like a real movement towards valuing that. And so whether that's, through consumers, if we can place financial pressure on them, or whether there needs to be like federal regulations to demand that, these companies prioritize that. I think it needs to be much more of a key thing that we fight for, rather than right now. I think it has become sort of just companies paying lip service to the idea of diversity.
How important has role models and mentors been for you?
Oh, incredibly important. I think, in terms of thinking about what makes people successful, I think there are certainly a lot of features about individuals. So, having drive, having, a desire to learn, being open to learning and working hard. I think all that's very important, but there's a huge luck factor too, which is who you come to know, finding a mentor that you click with. I think the best way to do that, because it can be so, luck of the draw, whether you find someone that you really mesh with and who will be willing to support you, is to try to meet as many people as possible. So like, for example, I think throughout college and medical school and beyond, I relied a lot on people introducing me to, faculty members that they knew were interested in mentoring students who had some kind of interest that aligned with me. And that's really, I think, a big part of what made me successful in medicine is I had mentors who looked out for me. So for example, Dr. Traverso, who I mentioned, who I've been doing research with, he's looked for many opportunities to put me forward, when someone's asking him to comment on something or work on a project and he can't do it himself, he'll put me forward instead as someone who can maybe work on that, or looking for projects for me to collaborate with other people that he knows, or letting people publicizing when I've published a paper or something like that. Really being a mentor and a spokesperson, a champion for you. I think that makes a huge difference. I can speak about so many other mentors I've had throughout the years, and I think also important is to have mentors who are both like you, who know sort of the challenges that you face, but also mentors who are different from you, who can give you a new perspective, challenge you in a new way, or offer some skills or something that they have that you don't. So I do think that mentors are very, very important in helping people succeed, especially in small fields like STEM. And so I really can't emphasize that enough.
It's so interesting because I get to meet incredible women like you, who are really like badass, basically, in the world of STEM. And I'm just like, when we hear from women like you, it's incredibly inspiring because it's about representation. But part of me thinks, women have what it takes. They can do these STEM subjects, they're doing it, and we just need more of them. And then I think, well, maybe the problem is not with women, it's men that need to change their attitudes towards seeing more women in these industries. What would be your perspectives on that?
I think it's really both. I think from the systemic level, I think the other thing too is that, it's usually not men who are like consciously trying to hold women back or threatened by women or anything like that. Like one of the things I've heard, it's like, it's not a problem with men, it's a problem with the patriarchy. And so it's really more about the system that's been created over decades, that people haven't really consciously questioned. And I think it's the system really, I agree, that needs to change. And part of that is, roles can be played by both men and women. So I think for men, like thinking about what are the unconscious biases that I may have about women in STEM, and how can I help to address that and be a champion for them to help bring more women in. And I think, as we are trying to change systems, we can do things for ourselves to help us, be more active and be more represented within STEM. So I think, changing from a systems level with help from an individual level to help push things. It's like both a push and a pull, in terms of changing the system. And I think one of the most important things that we as women in STEM can do is to help each other. I think it's really important for women to mentor other women and to champion other women, because I said we've been through many of the same struggles that, I think men would love to help with. They just don't know what those struggles are. And so, for women to really band together, help us, lift each other up and push us forward, I think is going to be really critical to changing really the STEM culture.
So much of what you've said kind of fills me with hope that more and more women will just find that confidence and inner strength to apply themselves to their passions in the same way that you're doing. So thank you.
Of course. And I think, I'm really excited to see sort of the next generation of women in STEM. I think it's becoming so common now for, girls to be like, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be an engineer. Like no one even thinks twice about it. And I think that is certainly a move in the right direction. And so I'm really excited to see all the women, after us who come up in STEM.
And I'm also really excited to see all of the amazing science that you're doing going forward. Reading that paper about your work is fantastic. And thank you for all that you're doing.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening, and please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review it if you can. The more ratings and reviews, the more interest from those trusty algorithms, which could help to increase the reach of this show. And you can watch the video recording of this conversation on YouTube on my new series called Esteemed Women. It's all about self-discovery and self-evolution on innovation. So as always, be kind and loving to yourselves, and I wish you all a great week.